Hello and welcome to Ahval Podcasts, the home of objective, up-to-date and independent reporting on Turkey. Don't forget to follow our reports through social media, on ahvalnews.com or through our mobile app. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome to Hot Pursuit, part of Ahval podcast series. And we are going to talk about upcoming Istanbul elections, or rerun of Istanbul elections, to be more precise. The circumstances which led to June 23 elections are, to say the least, extraordinary. And we are going to talk about the current situation and the prospects and the possible outcome of the elections with Howard Eissenstat, who's my guest today, associated professor with St. Lawrence University and non-resident senior fellow with Project on Middle East Democracy, POMED in short. Welcome, Howard.
Hi, Yavuz. Good to be with you.
Great to be with you as well. So let's begin with the basic question. Istanbul. Why is this election so important? What makes it so crucial?
Well, I think that Istanbul is an important city for a bunch of reasons. It's the mayor of Istanbul has a $10 billion budget. It's a tremendous source of rent for President Erdoğan's patronage system. The coterie of business people around him that benefit from his rule benefit largely through Istanbul. It has a close personal tie for Erdoğan. It's not only where he was born and raised, but also where he began his own political trajectory. It's Turkey's. It's not Turkey's political capital, but it's its first city.
So that is
that's Istanbul.
Vital for Erdoğan's future as well.
And I have to say, I mean, Istanbul was important on March 31st by forcing a rerun of the election. It has compounded the importance of this election. The overturning of the voice of the people, democratic election after March 31st, has made this Istanbul election even more important. It has become effectively a referendum on Erdoğan's rule. And should he lose and should he accept that loss, it would demonstrate real limits on his capacity to his control over the country. At the same time, should he win or force a win through institutional leverage, then it really throws into question his bona fides as a democratically elected leader.
So whichever way you look at it, it is a very critical turning point. And this is indicated also in the sort of monitored turn and swing of the waters. If we look at the latest surveys by two respected, one of the very few actually credible, reliable pollsters in Turkey, one being Konda, the other being Metropol. And also we should add Akam, Avrasya Araştırma, Avrasya Research. And all three indicate that there will be a big gap between those who support Erdoğan's candidate, Binali Yıldırım, and Ekrem İmamoğlu, the opposition candidate. All indicate a favored swing towards İmamoğlu with 7 to 9 percentage points, whereas Akam predicts 6 percentage points in favor of İmamoğlu again. So all indicators are that İmamoğlu will come out as an even stronger mayor if we presume that these predictions are true. Why do you think, if so, this turn, this swing has become so visible?
I'll say at the start that I'm wary of taking Turkish polls too seriously, because I'm wary about often we don't get a sense of their margin of error. There's some sort of nuts and bolts methodology issues that are in question. But I think that the sheer panic of the AKP over the last couple of weeks, the decision, for example, to allow a live debate, this latest thing with Öcalan, they all speak to a panic. They say, right? So while I'm as a default kind of distrustful of Turkish polling, it seems the AKP seems to believe that they're in trouble as well.
What do you expect yourself?
Well, I don't have the capacity to talk about margins, but it certainly seems to me I don't see any compelling reason why Imamoglu would get fewer votes on June 23rd than he got on March 31st. And I can see significant reasons why he would get more. There's a higher level of excitement. That means that many of those undecided votes, the Istanbul election was fairly typical in terms of voter turnout on March 31st, but we can expect a higher vote turnout this time around. There was at least some discussion within JHP supporters that elections don't matter anymore for March 31st, and I think there were people who were informally staying home that I think will come out. And I think that there was widespread dismay, far beyond the opposition, even within the AKP itself, about overturning an election on such baldly fabricated basis. And I think that there are real problems with the way Turkish elections are run, and I think there are real problems of manipulation. But the Turkish public very strongly believes in the electoral system, and I think that overturning the election was shocking, even for many people within the AKP base, people who weren't necessarily so excited about Imamoglu in the first place. So I don't have the capacity to talk about by what percentage Imamoglu's vote has improved, but I can't imagine that it wouldn't improve in general. There's been, of course, since those polls have come out, there's been a few new curveballs in the electoral process, and we can talk about those. But that was certainly my thinking at the beginning of the week.
I see. We of course we can't know for sure what whether or not Konda or Metropole or Rakam or they will prove to be right in their predictions. But we know what we know. For example, that the Kurdish vote, the HDP voter base, was key, not only in Istanbul but in many major cities.
Absolutely.
And this is something that people agree on. And of course, the Kurdish, realizing that the Kurdish vote, HDP vote to be more precise, is key. AKP has made, Erdoğan in person has taken some steps. And as we speak this morning, today, there was a letter by Öcalan whose deciphering was rather laborious, actually. And he called in the letter for the Kurdish vote to be independent or impartial, rather.
Neutral, right? Exactly.
And impartial, but it was hard to decipher what he means by that. And there was hours-long turmoil within the HDP or within the Kurdish political movement. And the HDP, the party, issued a statement saying that what Öcalan wrote and said was not different from what HDP had said, which means that there will be a vote against Erdoğan, which means that there will be participation, or indicating at least that there will be participation.
Which is certainly not what Öcalan, what Öcalan indicated in his letter.
Oh, so that's not how you read it.
No, I think that Öcalan said impartiality. It was clearly in this context. I don't agree with the HDP decision to throw its weight behind Imamoglu. I think that there's Öcalan didn't write this letter without a context. There's been a wooing of Öcalan by the AKP since the March 31st election. You saw he was allowed to see his lawyer. He was allowed to see his family. We saw Binali Yildirim go to Diyarbakir and try to speak a couple of words of Kurdish. It's clear that the AKP recognized that the Kurdish vote was central and has been trying to make inroads and was using, and I think successfully has tried to use Öcalan as leverage. In addition, we see the HDP make changes as well. HDP's support for Imamoglu in the March 31st election was tacit, it was implicit. This time around, it was explicit. Demirtas made a statement in support of Imamoglu, and that represents a change as well. And I think it represents tensions within the HDP, tensions within the Kurdish vote, and frankly, I'm distrustful of anybody who says with assuredness at this point just how that those tensions will play out.
But Öcalan, being a cautious figure in his own frame of politics, doesn't this mean that if the Kurds defy whatever you say he told them, doesn't he take a big risk, huge risk, unusually high risk?
Well, I mean, I think that I think it's pretty hard to do a deep dive into the thinking of a man who's been in prison for 20 years, much of it in solitary confinement, much of it isolated from not only his community, but also
from the world,
his family and lawyer. So I mean, I think it's a sort of a fool's errand. Certainly, unless one's a biographer of Öcalan, I think it's a fool's errand to try to guesstimate what his thinking is at this point. I think that he has been trundled. When he is trundled out publicly, it is for the AKP's benefit, right? And how that happens, right? And that's not just this time. It's happened multiple times over the last decade and a half.
Yeah.
When he's allowed to speak publicly, when he's allowed to engage with leadership, it's for the AKP's benefit. And I think that this fits that pattern. How that fits into Öcalan's worldview, into Öcalan's decision-making process, I can't say, because we don't get to hear from him unless what he's going to say is going to work in the AKP's benefit.
And no matter what, by the end of Sunday evening, Sunday night, we will see whether or not the church segment will have March 31st. Excuse me?
That's what we said on March 31st.
Yes, and that brings us to the final question. We will see an outcome. What are the stakes, particularly for Erdoğan and for Turkey?
So, look, I think I hit on this a little bit early on. I think that in a tight election, Erdoğan can pull out a win through his control of institutional mechanisms like the Supreme Electoral Council. I think it seems likely, given what we know now, given the apparent panic on the part of the AKP, it seems likely that the margin of error, or the margin by which İmamoğlu is going to win, is going to be even greater than it was on March 31st. That leaves Erdoğan with a few unsavory choices. He can engage in much more blatant types of manipulation to throw the election. I think that's very high cost for him. But of course, it maintains that control over Istanbul. He can allow İmamoğlu to win and then effectively open up prosecutions and go the trustee, the Kayyum route that he used with the HDP in 2016, 2017. Mm-hmm. Those are both very high risk, high cost choices, because while they maintain control of Istanbul and over Istanbul's resources for Erdoğan, they also really throw into question that basic legitimacy that he has been a core of his rule. The last option, the option that I think it's not a great option, sort of democratically, but it's maybe the best option on the table, is that Erdoğan would choose to allow İmamoğlu to stay in office, but to limit his control by devolving power to the districts, to the district level where AKP governance is still in power, or bring it up to the central governance level, effectively allow İmamoğlu to be mayor, but to remove the real powers associated with it. But none of these look great for Erdoğan. If he takes Istanbul, then he demonstrates institutional power, but he loses a basic element of his legitimacy. If he allows İmamoğlu to stay in power, even symbolically, then we have a situation where there's blood in the water, where all of Erdoğan's rivals, all of the discontent that we know exists within the AKP, all of those people are likely to be emboldened. And if there's one thing that we know about Erdoğan, it's that he believes that all conflict is existential, and that he is a fighter to the end. And that's why in my piece for POMED, I conclude with, for the short and medium term, no matter what happens, we're likely to see an increase in instability in Turkey, because whether İmamoğlu is allowed to stay in power or not, Erdoğan comes out of this weakened, and weakened doesn't necessarily mean safer.
So what we will see is a weaker Erdoğan, regardless of the outcome, but also maybe, let's say, quote unquote, more politically dangerous, more gambling Erdoğan, and
sure.
Extended crisis for Turkey.
Sure. I mean, even if we look at in the period between March 31st and today, we've seen a half dozen journalists get beaten. We've seen the head of the main opposition party get beaten with the mildest of condemnation from the government. We've seen crackdown on the opposition. We've seen this sort of kitchen sink response to İmamoğlu, and we see a kind of desperation. I don't see any reason why that desperation gets lightened and that post June 23.
Well, thank you. My guest today was associate professor with St. Lawrence University and now senior fellow with Project on Middle East and Democracy, POMED, Howard Eissenstat. Thank you, Howard, for this conversation.
Thanks, Yavuz. It was good to talk.